I need to stop making life hard on myself, Mike.
What'd you do this time, Joe Bulig?
I don't even know. Like, we've got some form of like weird tech thing going on. So if you are watching this and you see Mike stuttering a bit, it's because Joe did something and I can't figure out what it is. And here we are. So life happens. That's what I'm going to chalk it up to.
But if you're listening to the artisanal, handcrafted audio version, should be fine.
It's true. It is true. So between that, and I've also been playing around. We haven't talked about podcast gear in a while, but I picked up a Rodecaster Pro this week.
Saw that.
I'm running everything through it right now. I'm still learning a lot about it. So if I screw something up and it sounds bad this time around, it's Joe's fault, not Mike's. Just going to say that. So I'll give you an out this time, Mike.
Thank you.
There's that.
Thank you. Well, I tend to dial in my system and then never touch it.
Yep.
Like I think I shared a picture of with you of my desk setup, which looks ridiculous.
Yep.
But it is all set up specifically so that I can come down here and not touch anything and just start recording. Like
Yep.
I have my DSLR, the one I use to not only as a webcam for the live recording right now, but like when we shoot video for the suite setup, that's the camera angle, that's the settings, all of the aperture and the ISO. It's like all dialed in perfectly. So I can come down, I can hit record, and I can record video knowing that I didn't screw anything up and I don't have to redo it again.
Yeah, I hear you.
I hate touching anything on this rig.
I would love to be in that spot, but part of the reason I made the move is just because like I've struggled to get clean audio off of my other setup. And
Sure.
I'm pretty sure it's the preamp in that little soundboard that I've got. And although that works, I'm constantly trying to clean things up. I'm sure you deal with that too off the audio you get off of me, but I'm regularly trying to get it cleaned up. So I'm hoping the preamp on this is a little nicer and I can get a better output from it. But
Sure.
I'm also learning that some of the issues I deal with is the fact that whenever we record, like I've got my computer sitting here and the fans are running at 100% the whole time and I can never find a way to make that not happen. So create problems and then try to work your way around them, and then it's just impossible. So until Joe buys a desktop computer that he can bury somewhere else to get the fans away from the mic, this is where we'll be.
You just need an M1. Get one of those new fancy iMacs.
They look nice. Do you like them? I like the style of them.
Well, I have an M1 Mac Mini, which I actually love, except that it causes a few weird issues, which I don't know how to solve. I'm sure they are solvable. I don't think it's completely the M1 architecture's fault. But my way around this is just make sure I restart my computer before I do anything important.
Yeah, sure. I have heard from a lot of folks that have the M1s that are doing like AV work that struggle with them.
Okay.
And I can't tell if it's because of the software not being caught up. The chat's telling me to get a Mac Pro. But the thing I don't know is with all of like the Blackmagic software and stuff that I use for the video switching stuff at church and such, I don't know how well that stuff's going to play with an M1. So outside of doing $1,000 experiment, I am not ready to go there. So I need to wait a little bit before we jump in.
Well, for whatever it's worth, I do have an ATEM Mini sitting right here.
Yep.
But my cameras aren't good enough to really take advantage of it. Well, for this sort of thing anyways, because I wanted to use it for like webinar presentation and then switch between like my iPad and iPhone screens and have those up as different inputs, put my video in the corner, transition between stuff.
Sure.
It's great for that. But I have two cameras. I have a Canon EOS 70D, which is an older one. That's the one I'm using as the webcam, and I'm using Cascable for that. That works perfectly fine, except it doesn't have clean HDMI out, which is the A10 Mini. So
sure, it's
a weird aspect ratio if I'm going to use that one. And then the other one I have is the 5D Mark III.
Okay.
It's the older 5D, and that one was built in like 2012, 2013, and they hard coded an automatic shutoff after 30 minutes or 29 minutes, 59 seconds, so that it wasn't classified as a camcorder for European taxes.
Yes.
Which is completely ridiculous, but so that one just shuts off after a while.
Well, I use a GoPro, which seems to do okay. But outside of that, I do a lot more with the audio gear, but I don't know, gear. It's one of those things you can spend infinite amount of money on and never be happy with it. That's what I think. But
hey, speaking of audio gear, I got something new this week, which you may appreciate as a church sound guy.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the Line 6 Helix line?
Line 6 Helix line. No.
Any of the guitar players at your church use that? Okay, so Line 6 is a guitar company, essentially. They make effects and amps and stuff. But
yeah.
A long time ago, they made this thing called the Pod, which was that red, like, kidney bean shaped thing.
Yep.
And then they updated all of their stuff, and they came out with this Line 6 Helix stuff a couple of years ago, and that's kind of like the super high-end, really nice sounding effects. And the floorboard alone is like $2,000. There's a rack-mounted unit you can get, really, really high-end stuff. Well, they made they updated the Pod line last year, so they made a Line 6 Pod Go, it's called.
Okay.
And it takes all of the good sounding Helix effects, but strips out a lot of the fidgety stuff that you don't really need.
Okay, sure.
And so like as an example, the Helix, you can have like two separate signal chains in the board. So you can send like a chorus and tremolo to the right speakers and an overdrive and a compressor to the left speakers.
Okay.
And I don't need that. I just need some nice sounding effects because I can't have an amp on stage. So I got the cheap one.
Nice
and
work.
It sounds really good, and it's really perfect for what I do. It's got like a little briefcase carrying case thing that it comes with. So it's like this padded case that's made just for this thing, and so it's easy to carry it back and forth from church along with my guitar. And I love this thing, and it's got all of the like different amp simulation, so you can say I want like this type of amp simulation, I want it running through these speakers, and I want this type of mic, and I want it placed 3 feet away.
Yeah.
And then you put in all your guitar effects and you can get some pretty crazy sounds out of it. But some people generally like it because it's one connection, going straight into the board.
Yes, that's what I was just thinking. It's like, as far as how to hook this thing up, like it sounds like I got just one cable, which my life way easy.
Yeah.
Happy Joe in that scenario.
Yeah, so take a look at it and then try to convince your guitar players to get one.
Sure. Or sometimes we just buy that stuff and let them use it while they're here. Like that's kind of what we end up doing in a lot of cases. Like, this will make my life easier, so I will buy it. You use it while you're here. Like,
sure.
We do that a lot. So anyway, we didn't join today to talk about audio gear, but I'm giving people excuses for why audio might not sound good this week. And the video won't be good this week. So here we are. That's the way this stuff goes. All of that to say, let's jump into follow-up. I've got a couple of them here, and then we also need to talk about an episode we did outside of Bookworm. But the first of these that I want to point out is like this whole upper and lower bounds of creation. Like we talked about this, where you set the minimum amount of time and work you're going to spend on a task, but you also set the upper limit. Like you can't go over a certain amount. And I did this and had some success with doing some writing and doing some video editing. One of the results of that is an article I published on using a Stream Deck with OmniFocus, which is kind of interesting. So there's that, kind of an interesting article. I've had a couple folks already email me saying, what? I didn't even think about doing this. Like, yep, pretty much. It's kind of been my experience with the Stream Deck. It's like, I didn't know you could do most of this stuff, but here we are, and it's fun.
Yeah, you created more work for yourself because people are asking you questions about this stuff that you show there but don't explain.
Yes. But, it's been fun at the same time. So, yes. So anyway, that's what I've been doing. I couldn't find. Did you have any follow-up from last time? When I was putting the outline together, it wasn't in the outline from last time around.
I don't think I did. Maybe I just missed it. I know I made sure that I wrote down yours when I was editing the episode because I'd forgotten to save them in the actual file while we were recording. Yeah, I don't think I did, other than the aforementioned special episode where you and David ganged up on me and made me read a fiction book.
Yes, which was very fun. So Mike, you should introduce this.
Sure.
This is kind of your territory.
Well, this is a special episode for the Relay FM, the members there. So if you were to listen to Focus, for example, you can support Focus directly, $5 a month, just like you do for Bookworm. And then you get access to like the Deep Focus feed where you get the longer episodes with additional content. And then you also get access when you join a Relay FM show like that you get access to the crossover feed, which is where once a year, every show publishes a special episode. And this is where like Gray and Mike typically have done like those text adventures with Jason Snell as the Snellotron computer sort of a thing. And so David had suggested to me, hey, you should read a fiction book for the Focus special episode. And I was immediately like, no, not going to do that. He actually said that in the episode. That is 100% true. My response immediately was like, no, that's too much work. I can't squeeze that in right now. And then Joshua asked me, my son asked me about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And he was looking for books to read over the summer. And I went on Amazon, I bought this series, and he wanted to talk to me about the book as he was reading it. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll read it so we can talk about it. And then I got back to David and I'm like, okay, fine. I've come around on this fiction book thing. You want to do this? And he's like, yeah. And I'm okay. Well, I got to bring Joe in because he's been bugging me about this for years.
Yes.
And if I talked about a fiction book without him, he'd probably kill me.
I would make my way to Wisconsin and we would have a chat with you pinned to the wall, maybe. Yeah.
So we recorded, it's about a 40-minute mini bookworm about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and it turned out about exactly how I was hoping it would. I went back and listened to it after it published. I was really happy with how it turned out. I will say that I mentioned this in the episode too, I was terrified as I was reading this because I felt the mental tick to go take notes on what I was reading, but there was nothing to take notes on. It was just a story. So I walked into it and I'm like, oh boy, I don't know how this is going to go, but it went really well.
Yeah.
I would, yeah, if you are a Relay FM member, you should have access to it. You just got to log into your membership section. You can get the crossover feed and then it'll show up. And what's cool about this is that it goes out to all of the members of all of the Relay shows, not just the focused audience. So hopefully, a few people find out about Bookworm from it, but I appreciate you taking the time to go do that. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was super interesting. It's like, okay, well, I talk about fiction books with my wife and kids and some friends fairly regularly. And so I was familiar with like, how do people talk about fiction books as compared to nonfiction, which we'll get into here. But I know that you don't have that background. So I wasn't sure how you were going to handle it. And I thought you did well. You did good. Proud of you, Mike.
Thank you. I was terrified. It was fun, though.
The question that everybody wants to know now, though, has your view on fiction changed?
I don't know. I think my view on fiction has changed. Am I going to read more fiction? Maybe not. I don't know.
Sure.
I think I will occasionally. David has already followed through on his threat to send me another fiction book.
Yep.
So I have at least one more to read, but I don't know. I still prefer the nonfiction books, even the ones that I have to wrestle to get through. I just see value in those, and that excites me more than a good story does. But
sure,
that's just how I'm wired, I guess.
I was hoping. Sorry, team. We tried. We tried to get him on board, but I don't think he's going to be a fiction addict anytime soon. Maybe next round.
You may see a fiction book pop up in the Gap book section here and there.
We'll see. We'll see. I want to see you actually pull it off first. When you have a Gap book episode that is a fiction book, I will call it out. But until then, I'm not going to hold my breath. That's for sure.
All right. That's probably a smart idea.
All right. this all said, as Mike decides to procrastinate on the continuation of his fiction reading habit, let's talk about procrastination in today's book, The Now Habit, by Neil Fiore. And this one I picked partially because it has the word habit in the title, and also because so much of what we do and what we talk about has the process of delaying action or storing things for later, right? So much of what we was like, how do you plan what you're going to do in a week? How do you know what it is you need to do later in the day? Those are all things for later, right? And this is called the now habit, which in my head meant we're going to reel that in and do things right now instead of putting things off and waiting until later. And now that I've read the book, I'm kind of confused. So
So you were expecting kind of GTD Junior or what?
I'm not sure what I expected. In my head, this was going to encourage me to find ways to act on things when they show up, as opposed to storing it to work on it later.
Yeah, that's not what you got.
And that is not what I got at all. So I didn't do enough research on this book before I selected it, or this is just marketed very badly to help people understand what's actually in it. Now, that all put out there, The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, the tagline on it is a strategic program for overcoming procrastination and enjoying guilt-free play. And I feel like that is probably what I should have focused more time on as opposed to the actual title.
Sure.
Because I don't feel like the two go together. Maybe I'm just too dense and can't see it, but that's my perspective on it. Did you get what you expected out of this? Did you have any expectations? I know when I pick a book, you don't always have expectations of what you're going to get.
I had heard of this book previously, but I had not read it, and I was not familiar with the topic. So I was just going at it from the title, just like you were. And I will say that it is not what I expected. I think it's better than I expected, not because, oh boy, Joe's picking another goofball book, but just like looking at the reviews on Amazon, it seemed like there were some people who were very strong negative reactions to this one, which you see sometimes in those systems type books, because people try to apply that specific system and then it doesn't work for them. I think GTD was kind of the thing that came to mind as the same sort of thing. Like, there, maybe for the right person, this is really powerful, but also going into it a little bit wary because obviously it's not working for some people.
Yeah.
Do you know when this book was actually published, the first version?
Yes, it was in 1989.
Okay, so it's a bit older, and I think that shows through, but it's also written by a doctor, and I think like there's a lot of lists and a lot of like these 5 pieces, these 6 steps, whatever. I felt like those lists that he explained in here, those were all a lot more clear and made a lot more sense than I was anticipating.
Sure.
You know, the first time you see those bullets, or, you know, these are the different steps in the system, my shields go up. But I found myself like going through the first and be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Actually, there's a lot of good stuff here. I'm kind of wondering, because it was written in 1989. I don't know. I mean, we've read some of the older business self-help productivity type books, the 7 Habits, How to Win Friends and Influence People, stuff like that. I kind of wonder if this was one of those like landmark books about procrastination back in the day. It kind of feels like it might have been, but it also kind of feels like if I were to come at this now in 2021 as opposed to 1989, I think you got to kind of recognize that there's a little bit of history here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll if you take it just at face value, you will miss out on the good stuff, I think.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a valid point, because I think that's spot on. if you try to put this into context of the time, like digital natives didn't exist, and the online world, I mean, it existed, but it was far from where we are today, and it's just a whole different perspective, right? So I'm with you. You know, it makes sense what you're saying.
It's a different perspective, and what that means is that if you just take the content of what he's saying, it's not valid anymore because everything is bigger, stronger, whatever. Like his advice for blocking out distractions was when you had a TV that you had 6 channels on and you didn't have the internet in your pocket.
Yeah.
But you can take the concepts and you can kind of extrapolate those out, and that's where, you know, I don't necessarily think he's wrong, although there is a scenario where you look at it and you say he's wrong because of the specifics of what he's telling you.
Correct. Yeah. I think this is one where you kind of have to look at the intent and the broad picture of what he's saying and not get too hung up on the details. Because if you pay attention to details, you're like, what? And I said, what? A lot in this book. So we'll get into this. So let's start at the beginning. This is not a 3-part book. There are no parts to this. It's just chapters, which is, I guess, a breath of fresh air on that. I don't know why we've kind of gotten hung up on 3-part books, but it seems like they're everywhere, and this is not one. So there's that. Maybe it was pre-3-part book days. But chapter 1 here is why we procrastinate. If you haven't caught on to this at this point, the entire book is about procrastination. And step 1 on that is trying to figure out why we procrastinate. And this is where I had my first, but you forgot one, points. Because he has a number of, and I don't have it in front of me, like of the specifics for why, like the different reasons people give for procrastinating, but a lot of it has to do with anxiety and overwhelm. Mm-hmm. And anxiety in the sense of like trying to be perfect and knowing that you cannot be perfect, and the overwhelm of having too many things to do or not knowing what to do, having low self-esteem. Like these are all things that are some of the reasons for why we procrastinate. And I was curious, Mike, do you feel like he covered all of those? Or did you feel like that was incomplete?
It probably is incomplete, although he's got these 6 warning signs, which are in my MindNode file. So I wrote these down. These are all question-based. Does life feel like a long series of obligations that cannot be met? Are you unrealistic about time? Are you vague about your goals and values? Are you unfulfilled, frustrated, and depressed? Are you indecisive and afraid of being criticized for making a mistake? Are low self-esteem and lack of assertiveness holding you back from becoming productive? And those questions, they do a very effective job of painting a picture of, that's he's talking about me. Maybe not all of them, but you can definitely see yourself if you ask yourself those questions.
Yeah. Sure.
And then he talks about the ways that we procrastinate as an indirect way of resisting pressure from authorities, as a way of lessening fear of failure by providing an excuse for disappointing, less than perfect performance, and as a defense against fear of success by keeping us from doing our best. And again, I'm like, yeah, he's right with that. And then he talks about the pattern here, where you start with the perfectionistic demands. That leads to fear of failure. That leads to procrastination, which leads to a loss of confidence, which leads to greater fear of failure, which leads to stronger need to procrastinate as a temporary escape. And again, at this point, I feel like he's reading my mail.
Yes.
Like, okay, you win. I'll listen.
Yep.
So I feel like this first chapter is very effective in setting the tone that, hey, listen up. I have something to share with you.
Yeah, and he's very good at that. Because I'm with you. When I finished this first chapter, it's like, oh, somebody just put a wiretap on my brain.
Yep.
And figured out all the details I do wrong. And yet, whenever I talked through some of this stuff with my wife, who is far from a procrastinator, she's very on top of things and rarely puts things off. She mentioned a couple scenarios where she procrastinates and explained that, there is no overwhelm. There's no anxiety. There is no any of that with those. She's like, I just don't like it. And it occurred to me, it's like, he never talks about that. In
Yeah.
this whole book, he never talks about just not liking a task. He usually refers to those in the sense of like, you're overwhelmed that you have to do it. But what if you're not actually overwhelmed? You just don't like it, right? So I wasn't too sure what to do with that one.
I think he kind of indirectly speaks to that, where you have like resentment that you have to do this thing, and he talks about how you're rebelling. You use procrastination as like your way of getting back at the person who has asked you to do this sort of thing. And I feel like what you're talking about, where you just don't want to do something, sometimes that's somebody asking you to do something, and so you don't want to do it, so you're pushing back against it by procrastinating. Sometimes it's the person asking you to do it is you. And so that doesn't fit perfectly, but I think it's the same approach. Past Mike has told current Mike that he needs to do this thing at this time, and current Mike doesn't want to do it. So what is he going to do? He's going to stick it to past Mike and future Mike and put it off.
Right.
So if you think about it as different personalities that way, which I have done, not because I have a split personality, but just I've found that a useful exercise before. It makes sense in my brain.
Sure. I suppose I could see that. I could see how you get there. It was just a piece that stood out to me, and my wife and I, of course, talked about it. Like, I don't know how this fits in. So thanks for taking me through that. So I'm going to move through this because I feel like there's quite a few places we could get hung up as we get into this later. So why we procrastinate. My takeaway on that was anxiety and overwhelm. Those are the two big ones, and those show themselves in a lot of different ways. But then the next chapter here is how we procrastinate. And in this particular piece, it's like, okay, how do we actually go about doing this? And in most cases, of course, it's just inaction. Well, if I don't get back to my boss, I don't have to deal with the ramifications of acting on his decision. If I don't respond to that email, then I don't have to show my work about where I'm at on this progress, and then there's nothing for people to judge me on, right? So, like, how do we actually go about doing those individual pieces? And again, I feel like as I was going through this, like you're saying, the wiretap on the brain was definitely here. It's like, dang it, how do you know this? Like, this is exactly me. Stop it. This is weird. So, yes.
The procrastination and the anxiety working in 5 different stages in this second chapter, I thought was pretty interesting. Number 1, you give a task or a goal the power to determine your worth and happiness. Then you use perfectionism to raise the task 100 feet above the ground. That was a really powerful picture, I thought, because he talks about how, okay, now just walk in a straight line for 100 feet. Easy, right? Now imagine that straight line is between 2 buildings and it's 20 feet off the ground. Now it's not easy, and you're terrified of doing it. So step 3, you find yourself frozen with anxiety. You use procrastination to escape your dilemma. And then eventually you use a real threat, like the building behind you being on fire, to release you from your perfectionism. And at that point, it doesn't matter. You're going to get across the line as however you can. You have to crawl across it. You're going to do that. And again, that describes me, perfectionist Mike, where I tend to just put things off because I want them to be perfect. And if there's one big takeaway from this whole book for me, it is just to take the consistent action and not worry about the perfection. Don't get a real clear picture of what you want this thing to look like. Just show up and start. He talks about that later on, the power of starting versus focusing on finishing. And in this specific chapter, he talks about keeping a procrastination log where you're jotting down the times and the places that you tend to procrastinate. I think that's valuable. That's one of my action items. I'm going to start doing that. I'm not going to be real specific about it, but I am going to, in my notebook, just try to jot down, like, why am I resisting writing this article, making this video, whatever? Is it because I have a picture in my mind that I want this thing to be super, super awesome and cover every single detail? Probably. Do I need to do that? No. Going back to the effortless we talked about last time with the recording the course lecture, I'm guilty of that in my own circles a lot of times. And the only person that's judging that output is me. So I got to get over that inner critic and just, start taking action.
Do you think that the whole procrastination log piece is potentially difficult to create. This was something I spent a decent amount of time trying to process, because the times when I procrastinate, I don't think I even realize that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that I think I can be aware of, especially not in the moment, because if I was aware of it in the moment, I would just not do it. At least that's whenever I become aware that I'm procrastinating on something in the moment, I usually course correct. But there are a lot of times that I'm not actively doing it. It's second hand, so it's not an immediate issue. So for me to try to keep a procrastination log minute by minute, well, it wouldn't be minute by minute, but it would definitely have to be something that is done upon review of the day. I don't think I could do it as it happens.
Well, I think it works for me because, I mean, this is my plan for the day. And just as using today as an example, I've got the 0 to Obsidian content that I'm working on, a note-making article that I'm working on, playing with the Slated plugin in Obsidian, and recording Bookworm. So anything that's not on that list that I find myself doing is procrastination. And that happens
Sure.
all the time, to be honest.
Yeah.
I come down here because I do this the day before. I come down and I'm ready to work, and I look at this list sometimes and I'm like, I just don't feel like doing that quite yet. What else could I know? I'll go into Notion and see if there's something I can do in there. And that's procrastination. So I want to recognize those times and jot them down. And I'm not going to catch everyone, I'm sure of that. But I think even if I catch a handful of them, then that's going to be valuable for me. And I can look at, okay, so I identified this is the most important thing for me to do when I come down to work the next day. Why do I feel resistance or friction to doing that thing? Is it because in my mind I've already defined this as like a 6,000 word article? It doesn't need to be that, And so maybe I need to just reframe these things a little bit more when I jot them on my list of like, this is kind of the small thing I'm going to work on. And if I decide to go past that, great. But this is the easy thing for me to do in the morning when it's time to sit down and go to work.
I think Martin has a solid point here in the chat. Did you catch this?
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think if you complete a procrastination log, you are a very poor procrastinator. So as I've been sitting here processing that thought, which I think makes a lot of sense, if I'm able to complete a procrastination log, it would mean a couple things. One, at least based on the examples he has here in the book, there aren't that many items on that list in a day. So you're not actually procrastinating very many things. Whereas there are days I know I've spent the entire day in procrastination mode. So
sure,
that list would be like 30 or 40 items long to get it all written down. And it's not because I didn't get anything productive done. It just was none of the stuff I had intended to do that day, because I did a lot. Like I set up overlays on a different setup for the church, or I fixed a code issue that I decided to go try to find because I wanted to find a code issue. So like those are the types of things that I will do. They end up being productive, but it's on the wrong thing, which would mean that log would be quite long time it was all done. So the 2 or 3 things, the 4 or 5 things like that, I don't think would be.
Sure.
That's not what mine would be on many days.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit, because
Okay.
I think productive, the definition of productive is where that establishes the usefulness of this or not. So what you're saying is there are a bunch of things that I need to do, and if I get some of them done, then I have been productive. And so even if I say these are the ones that I intend to do today and I don't do those, but I do something else instead, then that can still be a productive day. I would disagree and say that is not a productive day for me just because I didn't follow through on my intentions. And that's just my personal preference on that. But I also think this is one of the sections that doesn't translate well to 2021, because I think the baseline assumption here is that you are mindful enough to recognize when you are not following through on your intention.
Yes.
And that is not the case anymore, because people will just go grab their phone, not even realize that they're doing it, and spend the next hour scrolling through social media and completely miss the opportunity that he's describing here to recognize that you are procrastinating on something that you have intended to do previously. So that's the situation I foresee with this. I don't necessarily think that what he's saying here is wrong. I just think it's harder to apply with the vast amount of information and the ease of access that we have to it today.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's valid. I get what you're saying about the productive day versus non-productive day. Like that makes sense. But at the same time, I should probably just say that it's one of those where it feels productive. Like that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because you feel like you're getting a lot done. And if somebody were to ask you, oh yeah, I got a ton done today. And if you said that, people assume you did all the right things and you're a really great person and I would love to be like you. And sure, people might love the stuff that comes out of that, but it wasn't what I intended. Thus, an entire day of procrastination log entries.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like getting a whole bunch of things done, and Martin's talking about this in the chat. Anything that isn't taking a task as done is tweaking. You could say that, but then if you're checking the boxes, does that mean that you're being productive? I would argue not necessarily. And people will define that differently, and that is fine. But I completely am in line with the idea that anything that's not following through on your intention is not productive. And I don't know how to say this nicely. Because I really do feel like this is one of those things that you're not going to get the value of it until you just commit to it and then you go all in with it, like my time blocked schedule. And I'm not saying that my time blocked schedule specifically is what everybody needs to do. And I recognize that there are office environments where you don't know what your task list is going to be until you get into the office and your boss can rewrite it at any given moment. And I kind of am at a loss for like what to do in those scenarios, other than avoid them completely, which is what I'm going to do with every fiber of my being.
Sure.
Because this feels really good. And getting a whole bunch of things checked off in a day, that might actually be very unproductive because it means that I'm going to be exhausted the next day and the day after that. I'm never going to recover. I kind of had a day like that this week. On Monday, I had my Monday is usually one of my most productive days anyways, because I know exactly what I want to be working on at the beginning of the week. We haven't had any meetings yet, nothing to distract me. So I'm cranking through stuff. Middle of the day, we've got our weekly stand-up for Blanc Media, and then I find out, whatever anybody else might need help with. And then this particular Monday, I recorded an impromptu Mac Voices with Chuck Joyner on Obsidian, which is published. So I'll put the links to those in the show notes if people want to see me convince Chuck to try Obsidian. And then I presented for the Silicon Valley Mac user group at 7 p.m. Pacific time, so 9 p.m. my time.
You're crazy.
And that was a 14, 15-hour day. And I was like, oh, it's just one day. I could take a little bit easy the next day. No big deal. No, it knocked me on my butt. It was really, really hard. Tuesday, Wednesday, and even Thursday. Like I was sleeping 9-10 hours a night and I'm like, what is wrong with me? And the only thing I can pin it on, because I feel fine, is that Monday just took so much out of me. So basing it off of the output is not the right method, I would argue. And you, like I said, you can combat that and say, well, my situation, yada, yada, yada. I get that. Ideally, though, you don't want to be doing that. A better measure is, did I follow through on what I intended to do, regardless of what categories stuff falls into?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a whole... That's a good point, because he does get into like this ABC prioritization thing, and whenever I saw that, I was like, what? Why would anybody... Like, we know that doesn't work, and we know that it's a bad way to do this.
Because that was the Franklin Covey planners, yeah.
Correct. That was the time frame, and that's what everybody did, and it was the thing that everybody wanted you to do. And it makes sense given the time frame. We've just kind of, come beyond that. And to transition this here, there are a lot of ways that you can come at this, right? should I be keeping logs? How do I even know if I'm procrastinating or not? What is defined as procrastination? And he has a definition. I don't even remember what it was because it didn't really strike a chord with me. Really, it was just you're not doing what you think you should. That's pretty much what it came down to, which is fine. But at the same time, there's this next section here is how to talk to yourself, which I thought was needed in this book, but also I don't want to say overdone, but because of the number of books that we've read at this point, this is something that has come up quite a bit, self-talk and how you refer to yourself within your own brain. And he points out a lot of potential causes for the way that you think about yourself and the way you lower your own self-worth through what you tell yourself, right? And there are a lot of things that come out in this, like the shoulds, like I should be doing X, Y, and Z, or I have to get that report done today, or this is something they need from me. And every time you do that, the underlying assumption behind it is that there's a negative that's going to happen to me if I don't do that. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. So when you're focused on the negative for not doing something, we tend to resist it, right? Because we're trying to resist that negative, thus the procrastination process. But a lot of this comes down to how we tell ourselves what we need to do and why we think we should do it, or in this case, not do it.
Yeah, they talk about the self-talk reinforcing feelings of victimhood, burden, and resistance to authority. And then it also talks about that have-to messaging that you were talking about, creating a no-win situation where you don't want to do something because someone is making you against your will. And that's the point where I realized that sometimes past you is the one that's making you do something against your will. They committed to something that you don't want to follow through on in the moment, but you don't want to go back on your word. So what do? You either do it and have a bad attitude about it, or in the moment, maybe you procrastinate on it as a form of rebellion. He says that saying no is a sign of self-respect, and I think that's really true. The big takeaway from this particular section for me, though, is to change that have to into a choice. And this is a fascinating concept for me because I fall into this have to trap a lot. I feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself when I commit to something to follow through, even if the other person that I committed to is like, oh yeah, you got a lot going on, don't worry about it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go back on this. I said I was going to do this and I'm going to follow through and do it, dang it. So reframing that, I think, is important. And it's also coupled with that saying no, because you can get to the point where you just have too much to do. But when you have a lot of things that you have to do and you don't want to do them and you feel that resentment, it's effective, I think, to change the terminology, and instead of saying I have to do this, saying I get to do this or I choose to do this, which is really true because all of those things that I have committed to, I have chosen to engage with. I think work is the one that specifically, if I'm not paying attention and I don't have the right perspective, I can resent the fact that I have all of these things that I have to do. But also when I take a step back and think about it, I am pretty darn lucky to have the type of career that I have and get to do the things that I do. Recording Bookworm, recording Focused, making these videos and writing these articles for the Sweet Setup. This is sort of like my dream job, and I have to check myself every once in a while. Like, this stuff that like a few years ago, you were dreaming of the day when maybe you could do this for a living. Like, what changed? How did you get to the point now where you resent the fact that you have to show up and do this stuff? And a lot of times there's absolutely nothing that has changed other than my approach to the work. And simply reminding myself of just what a great situation I have, a lot of times is enough for me to completely change my attitude about engaging with what I need to do.
It amazes me how much the way we approach something with our brains changes the way we act about it. You ever realize that? Like, whenever we think that something is dangerous, we will completely alter our lifestyles to avoid it. Even if we learn that it's actually not dangerous later on, we will still act as if it is. And that happens in so many scenarios. Like here's an example for you. I grew up in Missouri. Missouri has a fair number of snakes. And the snakes that I grew up around are water moccasins, copperheads, timber rattlesnakes. Like, these are all poisonous snakes. And one of those, the water moccasins, will actually chase you if you're around their nests. So I'm not a fan of snakes. That's what I'm saying. And to this day, I live in Minnesota now, right? The only snakes we really have are garden snakes, black snakes, and none of them really care about you. They won't, in a lot of cases, even try to bite you if you pick them up. Like, they're not poisonous. They're nothing. But if I see a snake in my yard, guess what Joe does? He jumps back and borderline runs away because I thought it was a copperhead.
And Becky comes out with the hoe and chops the head off.
I usually end up taking care of it. She's almost worse than I am. But the thing is, like, my gut reaction is still to this day to run away from it because of the thinking that I have that this is something that could kill me, even though it won't. So things can change. The way and the places and the things you're around can change, but it's okay. And I think this whole how you talk to yourself section, he does have, like what you were saying, the replacing I have to with I choose to. He has a handful of these phrases through here. Like, you need to replace I must finish with when can I start? You can replace this is a big project and super important with I can take one small step. What's the other one here? I must be perfect. Replace that with I can be perfectly human. I don't have time to play. I must have time to play. I must make time to play. Like, these are all things that it changes the way you come at it. Now, you might not believe yourself at first, right? And that's okay. But doing this repeatedly is the point, I think, in this whole section here.
Yep, I completely agree. That whole concept of play, by the way, that leads into the next section. That really fascinates me. There are a couple books on the concept of play. I'm going to be picking one of these shortly. So if you have preferences about one, Bookworm Club, go vote for it now.
Yeah, get it on the recommended list. That said, let's go into the next one here, because the next chapter is guilt-free play and quality work. And this, I don't have a lot to say about this other than his point is to schedule time to play, schedule that first, and then fill in around it with quality work. That's really what he's recommending here. And I get what he's saying. It just feels so backwards to me. It just feels weird. Again, that's fine. But his whole thing is that if you have play, if you schedule your breaks and schedule your rest and you put in these play times and making sure that you have much of them through the week, it frees up your brain and it cuts back on the time you have to get the things done that you need to do. And it can force you to have the rest and have the mental clarity to go to work when you have the gaps between the play. I don't know that I'm going to do this, but it's interesting nonetheless.
I was wondering what your reaction to this was going to be because of the situation, your work situation. And I feel like he's writing this from a certain perspective that is maybe hard for people to relate to, especially if you've got a 9 to 5. On page 41, he kind of plants the seed for this back in chapter 2. He says, don't expect to find 8 hours of quality work a day. Much of your legitimate activity in life is not directly related to productivity. Well, that's fine for you to say that, and I may 100% believe that, but if my boss doesn't believe that, then how does that help me? Right?
Correct. 100%. Yes. If I were to schedule all the play things I want to do ahead of time and then tell my boss what I was going to do, he'd be like, what is wrong with you? No, I need you here on Tuesday mornings. Like,
yes, but that doesn't mean that he's wrong.
Correct. Yes.
So how do you reconcile this if you're in that situation? And my covert advice, don't share this part with your boss, would be if you work from home, find ways to do this and don't tell anybody.
Yes.
It doesn't need to take, 2 hours out of your day either. But I think we're kind of in this unique situation with COVID where everybody is working from home and it's assumed that you have other things going on. And we are transitioning back to the way things were and what is normal. So this is absolutely the time where you should push back a little bit and just say like, no, I can't do that. And just see what happens. If people are going to ask you like, well, why? Like, what do you got going on? Then maybe, you don't have as much wiggle room here as you thought. But maybe they're just like, oh, okay, well, when can you do it? Half hour later than that? Okay, well, now you've just created 30 minutes in the middle of your day where you can go play.
Yep. Yep.
And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to go for a 20-mile bike ride. If you can do that, that's great. I do that, not 20 miles, but I build that into my schedule.
Right.
But it could just be, I'm going to go, we've got a basketball hoop in our backyard. I'm going to go shoot hoops for 10 minutes, and just finding the little pockets of time that you have to do that kind of stuff. I feel like there's a lot of value to be gained from that. And ultimately, if you are being measured by what you create or what your output is, this is arguably, to Dr. Fiore's point, the most productive thing you can do. If you're being paid by the hours that you put in, that's one thing. But if the real thing that the company values is what you are producing, then they're not going to think twice about this. They're not going to ask any questions. They're just going to see your output go up, and they're going to be like, whatever Joe's doing, that's cool.
I don't know how to do this, to be honest with you. Like, this is one of these that I would love to have this as an action item. I don't know how to do that because I'm not working from home. I'm in the office every day, 8 to 4. I am able to shut that door, but as you've heard, it may or may not actually help.
Doesn't necessarily mean anything. Yeah.
Nope. And it's not uncommon. I had it just a minute ago. Thankfully, I was muted, but somebody opened the door to see if there was anything going on in here. I have no idea why people do that. So these are things that
you need a big red
happen.
hue light you can put outside.
Right. But these are folks that don't go to our church, and this is the first time they're in this building. So
sure.
I don't know how to communicate these things to everybody without being a complete jerk, right? So I can only do so much if and when we get a house bought and I'm able to move my studio back to my home office. I will gladly do so because I can control it a little bit more. But as it is, trying to schedule playtime would mean leaving the building regularly,
mm-hmm.
and it would be very obvious what was going on. So there is no hiding that. There's the option for, like, normally on Friday afternoons, our building is completely closed up and there's nobody here. There's a wedding this weekend, which is why this is a bit strange. So normally I have the building to myself and we can do this all in a controlled environment. But again, like, I have the spots where I know I can do things like this, but it just doesn't allow. It doesn't allow for things like, I'm going to go for a run at 10 a.m. I'm like, no, you're not. So I don't know how to play that card. I don't know how this is expected to work for someone who's working in an office every day of the week. I just don't know how to make that work.
I completely agree with you. I sympathize or empathize with your situation. I don't think it's impossible, though. Maybe you can't do it according to the Now Habit system where it's an hour every day. Maybe it's an hour once a week.
Sure.
And I also think how you define play, maybe there's some flexibility there. So like if I was talking to somebody in your situation, what I would advise them would be pick a day of the week where maybe you can take an extended lunchtime. And then what you do with that extended lunchtime is up to you. But if you were to say, I'm going out to lunch, maybe no one's gonna raise a flag with that. Well, Joe's at lunch. He already told me that. And at that point, maybe you go for a walk, or you walk the dog, or you play disc golf, or maybe you just take an extended lunch. Maybe you meet a friend, and you have lunch with somebody that actually, as an introvert, that's the hard one for me, because he talks about later on with the unscheduled, like prioritizing the socialization. And that's just not me. But I know I have to push myself a little bit to do that, because friends are valuable, and you don't have friends if you are not friendly.
Yes.
But one other thing on this section, though, page 80, I think this is the part that really rings home with me, is both workaholics and chronic procrastinators are either working or feeling guilty about not working. That is true. So that is really what you're fighting back against when you are trying to prioritize play, is what can I do for even a short period of time, ideally every day, that is going to force me to break free from feeling guilty about not working.
Sure. But what you're talking about is like one day. Let's go on to the next chapter here. So overcoming blocks to action. There's one piece of this that I want to call out, because there are 3 different tools that he gives you here. The first of which is the one I want to talk about, which is 3-dimensional thinking and the reverse calendar. The second tool is the work of worrying, and the third one is persistent starting. And the first one of those 3, 3D thinking and the reverse calendar, I think, is what we're talking about here when we're talking about scheduling in the play, right? So
yeah, he talks about the unscheduled later. Yep.
Yeah, there's these 3 chapters kind of all fit together. Like, it should be a part. If you realize this, there's actually 3 parts. He just didn't break them off. Like, he talks about procrastination in the first 3, then he gets into how it works, and then he goes into once you're past it.
He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, there's a 3-part breakup here. He just didn't do it. And this 3D thinking and the reverse calendar is what we're talking about. Like, you schedule in your play, and then you have your spots in between that for your work. Did you understand 3-dimensional thinking? Did you get your head around this? Because he tells a story that somebody is doing 2-dimensional thinking, and then I didn't connect all the dots, and then he's talking about how once he started using this 3-dimensional thinking mindset, everything was solved. I'm like, well, what is it? And I don't think he ever explained it. Did I just miss this?
I thought I understood it. Now I'm looking at my notes, and you're asking the question. I don't have anything for that.
Okay.
So my interpretation of it, I think, is with 2 dimensions, you're not seeing the whole picture. There's a bunch of stuff behind that, the 3rd dimension, that you're not seeing when you have a 2D view. So I think what he's saying with this is that with your calendar, maybe you're putting all your work stuff on a calendar. That's a 2-dimensional view of your life. And your life is more than just your work. So that's how I interpret this, is that the 3-dimensional thinking, that's looking at the total area of the entire person, and then the calendar reversing that, prioritizing the personal stuff and then letting work happen inside of the gaps. I have issues with that specific approach, but that's what he talks about in the unschedule. So I think that's what he's getting at here. I actually like the number 2, the work of worrying piece.
Yeah.
Because I tend to worry quite a bit. And he's basically saying, like, well, you could either work on the thing, or you could work by worrying about the thing and not actually getting anything done. And that's totally true. Totally true. I can spend a whole bunch of mental effort worrying about something, or I could just, do it myself and get it over with.
Yep.
Which is kind of related to his 3rd point, just focus on starting. Don't waste your resources worrying about the stuff. Just start working on it.
Yeah, I feel like I used to be really bad at the worrying thing, but I've gotten to where now I think working in IT kind of breaks you of this, because here's an example. I freaked some people out over this one, and I was fine. We had a Sunday morning where the main computer that runs all the slides and all the lyrics and everything froze 5 minutes before the service started. I went in and was like, oh, and I immediately went up, hit restart. And everybody was like, it doesn't have time to do that. Like, we're not going to get it all back up in time. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's frozen. So it'll be started a little late. I mean, what are you going to do about it? So like that's my perspective. But everybody around me, there was like 4 or 5 people that were there. This has been 3 years ago or so. And they just freaked. Like, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. So like, hey, it's fine. It's totally fine. Not going to worry about it. Don't freak out. It's okay.
That's a great example, because in that moment, like what are you going to do? I mean,
right.
You're not going to solve it without restarting it. So why not just restart it? It takes as long as it takes. If you don't have slides at the beginning of service, you don't have slides at the beginning of service, but at least you've done what you could. Hopefully it comes back. And one other thing I thought was pretty fascinating in this section, in the work of worrying, is basically describing the Tim Ferriss fear setting exercise. Have you seen that TED Talk?
No. What is that?
It's pretty good. Tim Ferriss gave a TED Talk about fear setting, which is kind of based in stoicism, where like things just are, right? And he's got this whole process with these worksheets where you let your mind go and you think about the absolute worst case scenario, and you paint this picture in very vivid detail. And then at the end, you're like, okay, so if that happened, what would I do? And then you're like, well, it's probably not going to be as bad as that, so why worry about it? Because you've already got a plan in place now. If that were to have happened, that's kind of what you were talking about with the computer freezing right before service. Worst case scenario, the computer freezes right before service. Well, the computer froze right before service. Right. So what am I going to do at this point? It is what it is.
Yep.
So I'll just work with what I've got.
There are so many. Again, working in tech, I have stuff like this all the time, where stuff breaks. Like even when this computer just froze, right? I mean, it's real easy for me to kind of freak. Like, oh no, what's going on? And what was my reaction? Like, oh really? Come on. Like that's just completely different than what it used to be for me. Because I used to be like that, where I would just completely freak out over little things that happen like that, and I can't do anything about it. It's like, well, what do? You just, do what you can, move on. Which I guess brings us to the unschedule, which I feel like we've talked about. And it wasn't, it's at this point where he puts all the pieces together, right? So he's talking about guilt-free play. He's talking about how to overcome these blocks to action. And then he gets into this unschedule. I was trying to find the actual pictures he has here. But basically what it is you schedule in all of your playtime, all your meals, all your sleep, all of these things. You get all of that scheduled in there, and then you have the blanks between those. Mm-hmm. And that is where your work comes in, right? So that is the time when you can, that's the time you can devote to your work, right? So this is what I think would be really cool to do. But again, I can't figure out how this applies. If somebody figures this out on how you would apply this to an office IT worker, I'm all ears.
Well, I think the way to do this is to leave those 40 hours on your schedule. Just to real quickly walk through his process, which has actually 11 different steps, and I feel like a bunch of them are unnecessary. So I'm going to try and condense this.
Okay.
You schedule everything but work like you would normally would. And then all of the blank spaces in your calendar, that's where you can do work. But you only put work on your calendar when you have focused on your work without distraction for at least 30 minutes. So if you have 40 hours of blank space in your calendar during the week, that's your 40 hours that you're putting on your timesheet. But he would say you're not really doing 40 hours of work anyways. So instead of putting that on your calendar, what you're doing is you're using those blank spots in your calendar as the work times. And by not having work on your calendar, but the fun stuff on your calendar, you're looking forward to the next break that you get to take. And only after you stop working do you put those things on your calendar and you get credit for them if you have followed through with the intention and focused on the thing that you were gonna focus on, which I think is interesting. And it could show you exactly how much quality work you're able to do in a week if you were to walk up to your boss and say, hey, good news, I had 20 hours of quality work this week. and they're paying you for 40 hours of work, their reaction is probably like, well, what were you doing
Wait,
the rest
what?
of the time? But that's kind of an
I was
organizational,
playing.
yeah. And that's, for me, like, that's a sign that I'm not in the right place. Like, I want to be in an
Sure.
organization that recognizes that I am not going to be going all out for 40 hours a week. And if I kind of go with the ebbs and flows and I really like hit it hard when I'm in that flow state, then you will get more out of me than if I was just punching a clock and putting in the 40 hours. And ultimately, that's a win-win for everybody involved. But I also recognize that not everybody is in that situation. So what are you going to do with that? I think my approach, like I
Right.
said, would just be to leave X number of hours open. But then if you really want to optimize your own performance, you can take this approach and only give yourself credit for the stuff that you actually do. I don't think this unscheduled thing in this section, though. Like, I had issues with this. I think there's some gold in what he's telling us to do. But these hard and fast rules I don't like. Talks about don't work more than 20 hours on a project in a week. Don't work more than 5 hours on a project in a day. You must exercise, play, or dance for at least an hour per day. You must take at least 1 day a week off from work. And then you're aiming for just those 30-minute blocks. If you go over that because you're in a flow state, great. I feel like those could be helpful. I also feel like you said that it's not going to be an accurate representation of the modern knowledge workers world, however. So I do think that there's value in putting the fun stuff on your calendar, and I would prioritize that stuff, but maybe not to the level that he's telling you to do it. And then I would put work on my calendar. I do put work on my time blocked plan, not just after the fact so I get credit for it, but also I recognize I'm dealing with some procrastination stuff. So maybe I should follow his advice. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, that's the kicker here, right? Like, you can't really diss on this unless unless you've tried it. If you're a procrastinator, which I think in today's world almost everybody would say they are in some form. The question is, what do you do about it? Trying to record when I've worked on things for 30 minutes solid, I have no idea how that would work because I have so many things that pop up in the day that there are many days in a week and across a month where one 30-minute block doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I get 20 minutes to work on something, like here's an example. So the article I released this morning about the Stream Deck and OmniFocus and such, and I was talking about how I use this upper and lower bounds thing to do that. I had to have a timer on my phone that I could start and stop to tell me if I had gotten 30 minutes working on writing each day, because I was regularly getting 10 minutes in, somebody would come over, hey, Joe, sure, great, we go fix that, come back, start in again. 12 minutes later, hey, Joe, I've got... So trying to get 30 minutes in one block is difficult. Now, I could go somewhere else and hide, but then your phone's going off. I could leave my phone behind, but then you got people walking around trying to find you because they know you're in the building. Like, it's not a thing that works. So I'm better off, have a timer, start and stop it. And that's how I worked my way towards releasing that article, just because you do not know what you're going to run into each day. So trying to record 30-minute blocks, like I could record maybe 5-minute blocks, but that's a bit absurd. So
yeah.
Anyway, my point is, I don't know how, the type of work that was being done at the time, I don't think fits into, like what you're saying, the modern knowledge workers scenario. I don't know how to translate it in this particular case. So there's that.
Yeah, even for somebody like me, this is not appealing because I don't want to only take credit for the time that I spend after the fact. Like, I get the value in that, but it completely breaks my time tracking.
Yeah, sure.
Because if I was doing that, I'm not starting the timer when I switch the task, which that's the low maintenance version of this for me. Is like, okay, I'm going to be working on this thing now, so I'm going to start a timer. The good enough version of this for me is I look at the hours that are in my timery report at the end of the week, and I say, really, I wrote for 20 hours? Doesn't feel like I wrote for 20 hours. Let's see what I actually published. And then I either feel good about those hours, or I feel like, oh, I must have not been focused. I better put up some more controls to block out the distractions when I sit down to write, or clearly define the things that I'm going to be working on so that I don't feel that resistance when I sit down at the keyboard in the morning. That's good enough for me. Maybe you could say that this approach is better. I don't know. Maybe you could say this approach really only works for executives. Again, I don't know. But I think the real value to be had here is in figuring out how to apply these principles for yourself.
Sure.
Because you're right. The system that he defines here, I don't see this really working for anybody at this point.
Yeah, I don't know who this would apply to. It's a challenge. Well, I shouldn't say that. The people that it could apply to are folks like you. But I'm not sure that that's the right move either. Now, that said, this next section, though, working in the flow state, like that's one that I think everybody would say is a good thing to do, but this is going to put me right back in the same solo. When do I do this?
Yep.
So, but working in the flow state, of course, he brings up our friend Mihaly, and it occurred to me when he did that Mihaly's work has been around for a very long time.
Yes, it has.
This is not necessarily a new thing, right? So unless this was added in a later revision, going back to 1989 with Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi's flow work, is, I guess, somewhat impressive. But I was kind of caught off guard as far as where he went with this, because he's essentially talking about how to put yourself into this flow state, right?
Yeah.
And what I got was a plea to start meditating.
Which, can you say that is wrong?
I don't think I can say it's wrong. It's just
exactly
way off of what I was expecting.
Exactly. That is this book in a nutshell. It's like not what I was expecting, but I don't know how to argue with this.
Here, let's go here. Oh, and I'm going to take you.
Yeah, so this
here.
chapter starts with him explaining the flow state and how you got to turn off that critical logical part of your brain, and then he takes you through a 2-minute mindfulness meditation exercise.
Yeah.
Now, that I understand for people who don't meditate, and I include myself in that camp, by the way, that you feel like, well, I don't need to follow that. I can get into a flow state without mindfulness meditation. And you're probably right. But I also have read or listened to Chris Bailey has an Audible original called How to Train Your Brain. It's a fascinating, short Audible book on the productivity benefits of mindfulness meditation. And that specific perspective with that book, I say book, it's an audio program, that I think is very appealing to people. And it was number 2 on Audible for a very long time, behind like Obama's book and the Matthew McConaughey one, Green Lights or something like that, for a very long time.
Sure.
Having gone through that book, Chris did a bunch of research because he's Chris, and he found a statistic that said something like for every minute of mindfulness meditation you practice in a day, you gain back something like 7 minutes of productive work, up until about 15 minutes per day.
Okay.
At which point you still are gaining benefit from it, but there's diminishing returns.
Sure.
I can't argue with that. I think that's kind of what he's talking about right here in this chapter.
Yeah.
Just Chris Bailey did it a lot better. This is actually one of my action items, because I've gone through that Audible original, and David talks about this all the time on the Focus podcast, and I talk to Chris about it periodically. I have so many people in my life who are extolling the virtues of mindfulness meditation. Every single time I hear him talk about it, I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. I need to give this an honest shot. And it's not that I haven't given it an honest shot, but reading this, I'm going to give it a shot again.
Yeah.
Hopefully it sticks this time. I'm paying for 10% happier. I just need to follow through and do it.
Yeah. You're on 10% now? I thought you were still in what? Headspace. When did you switch?
I think I was working with 10% happier because I liked the widget a little bit better.
Oh, that's
the
right.
Headspace one just shows you, or it adapts dynamically. So it's giving me like a sleep story at the end of the day. If I haven't meditated, that's not what I want. I want today's meditation. So, and I'm not going to promise to stick with this again. I'm just going to try it one more time. Maybe this
one more time.
Well, see, that's the thing with all these books that we read. Mortimer Adler writes Syntopical Reading. They all come together, and I'm believing at some point this is going to click for me. And maybe this is the point, where I realize that this mindfulness meditation, this is actually related to quieting my logical brain so I can focus on just starting the creative process. Maybe this is the thing. If I do this right before I start work, that makes it easier for me to enter into that flow state and crank out the words in the morning. If I did that, I would get a lot of value out of this. So maybe, maybe that's what makes it stick this time. I'm not sure. I'm going to try it though.
2 minutes. It's all you're allowed.
We'll see.
2 minutes, mindfulness meditation. Pay attention to why you're procrastinating in those 2 minutes, and it will magically put you in a flow state 100% of the time. I don't think it's going to work that way.
I do think, one of the reasons that Chris did the Audible version of the book and not actually wrote the book was there are pieces of it where he takes you through a guided mindfulness meditation. It's just a couple minutes.
Okay.
So I feel like the ones that he takes you through as he's explaining the process is very similar to what Dr. Fiore is talking about in this book. So I don't think he's wrong in this process. I totally get your snarky response to this, like all you need to do is this 2-minute thing though, because it does feel very prescriptive, like just do this and the heavens will open and everything becomes easy. But again, correct. I'm not sure that that's wrong. I don't think it's as easy as he paints it to be, like just do this. Like the actual focusing on your breath is what makes meditation so hard. Your brain is so hyperactive. You got to train it to slow down and focus on something. But I do think that if you're able to do that, there probably is quite a bit of benefit to be gleaned there.
Yeah, I mean there could be. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and but I'm also not going to tell you that this 2-minute meditation thing is going to be a magic bullet to put you in flow state.
Yes,
because no matter what I do,
I agree with.
That transition from doing the mindfulness piece to doing the work. I'm ADD, right? Transitions are my nemesis, and trying to move from one over to the other is always going to be an entertaining process. So I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm not saying that if I do this, it is going to produce the magical effect that he promises, but I do think maybe it will make it easier.
Sure.
So on a scale of 0 to Neil, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm not going to say it doesn't. I would have to set up everything I'm going to work on after I'm done with that. I'd have to stay here at my desk and do it right here. Mm-hmm. So that whenever I come out of that, I could go straight into it. Maybe that would help. But if I were to go somewhere else where I could sit in peace and do this and then come over here, the process from over there to here, I'll get lost every time.
Sure.
Every time. Yeah. Anyway, we don't need to keep going on that. Fine-tuning your progress is the next piece here. And the only real thing that I got out of this was pay attention to your desires to procrastinate and continue to change your systems.
I hated this chapter.
Tweak and iterate. I was like, okay, this is all it is. Pay attention, change it, fix it if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's what this is. This is the cop-out caveat disclaimer chapter saying, hey, if it doesn't work, change it. That's what this is.
Yeah, he talks about setting effective goals in this chapter. You know how I feel about goals.
Oh, I knew you were going to bring this up. This is why I didn't even mention it. I knew you would bring it up.
And the other thing that he talks about is resilience and the planned setbacks. I feel like this is kind of an interesting idea where you plan these setbacks ahead of time so that you can learn from them and figure out where you tend to freak out about things so you can create new systems where you don't freak out about things. I don't know anybody who is going to take this approach. Why? Things are hard enough. Why would you plan these setbacks just to observe yourself like a lab rat That makes no sense. And the resilience thing, absolutely. Resilience, that makes a ton of sense. But you're not going to get anything out of what he tells you about resilience in this particular chapter. You need to go read Grit by Angela Duckworth instead.
Sure. Yeah.
So he talks very high level about a couple different things in this chapter, which I feel don't give you any real tangible, like, this is what you can do with this. He talks about the 5 types of distractions, and I guess he gives you a few pointers in setting effective goals. But of all the chapters and the way that they're written, I feel like this one is the one that has the least in terms of now I can apply this in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there's not really anything in this that you're going to come away from and say, that is my action item. This is just a fluffy motivational talk, I guess, is what this is. So
this is to fill out the non-existent third section.
Possibly, yeah. So fine-tuning your progress, and then he wraps up the book with the procrastinator in your life. Basically, what do you do if you have someone in your life who is a procrastinator? In which case, he kind of reiterates some of the self-talk pieces, but it's not self-talk, of course. It's talking to that person. Focus on the positive. What's the little amount you can give me here? Instead of saying, you have to do this, like, could you choose to X, Y, Z? Like, these are the things that he's recommending there. Basically, all you're doing is taking the same tactics and just turning it towards somebody else instead of yourself.
I like this chapter. I think this is a great way to end it because, number one, he's basically summarizing a lot of what he's told you in the book, but he does add a couple really specific things that I think are really helpful. Like, one of the ways that he phrases it, and maybe I just missed this in the first part, but I feel like when you're talking about working with somebody else, this makes it more clear. Don't demand compliance, but invite commitment, and function as a consultant, not a director. Can you apply that personally? Yeah. But if I am a manager working with somebody else and I'm trying to get the best work out of them, and I want to do this in a fair and not manipulative way, this is absolutely great advice. And then there's a whole bunch of specific things, kind of like a list of things to keep in mind when you're working with somebody. And then he ends it with a story about a husband and wife, which is the scenario in the back of my mind as I'm going through this is like, well, that's great if I'm a manager and I'm a boss over somebody and I can tell them what to do. But what if I don't always get my way? Like, how do I use this then? And he sort of addresses that with that story. And there isn't really a specific point by point, this is what you do, which is good because I wouldn't have liked it if he had done that. Essentially, what you have to do is you have to compromise. Right? You have to be okay with not getting your way all the time. And you're going to apply these things and you're going to invite the person to make these discoveries and figure things out on their own, which is what you have to do. You can't just say my way or the highway. You're not going to have a relationship for very long if you do it that way.
So true. So true. Absolutely right. I mean, it's relationship building is what that is. And
yep.
I think this is the part about that really stood out to me is that the type of conversation that you're talking about is very, very similar to the one that I've had with my wife that's been ongoing about ADD. Like, these are very similar conversations. Like, here's what I'm struggling with. I didn't intend to insult you. I didn't intend to leave you hanging. I just completely didn't realize what was going on. I just completely spaced. Like, that type of conversation is what he's encouraging here, or that needs to come out of having read this.
Yep.
So yes, relationship building. Be honest, be open, talk about things.
And that's how he ends the book. It's just over. There is no conclusion.
Correct.
Wrapping it all up with a nice little bow, which I actually kind of appreciated. I mean, Chapter 9 kind of functions that way already, but it didn't need to be any longer than it was. And I am thankful that he chose to end it there.
Yeah. All right. Any action items, sir?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
So I mentioned the procrastination log, and I'm not going to do this the way that he describes it, but I am going to commit to, if I recognize myself procrastinating, jotting it down in my bujo. I don't know how you're going to hold me accountable to this because I don't want to go for like a target number of log entries, and I don't care what they look like. I just want to notice them.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what's the next step is going to be once I notice them, but I know that they're there. And so I'm going to try the act of writing them down. I'm going to see what that triggers, basically, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And then
that makes sense.
And then I am going to commit to playing every day. I feel like I'm doing this already. He, in the book, talked about an hour of exercise, play, or dance every day. I'm not dancing. Sorry. Nobody wants to see me dance for an hour.
I do. I want to see that. Live stream that.
No,
I'll watch it. I bet I could get a lot of people to watch that one.
So I'm kind of doing this already. So it's sort of a cheating action item with the exercise. But basically with this action item, I want to just be a little bit more intentional about making sure that stuff gets on the calendar first. And then the other one that I've got is to try meditating again. And again, I have no idea if this is actually going to stick this time. I've done this enough times that at this point I'm kind of going into it skeptical, but we'll see. I think positioning it at the beginning of my day as a primer for work maybe is the thing that will make it stick for me, but we'll see.
For action items, I have two, one of which is a distortion of what's recommended in the book. And I'm going to call it a procrastination review. And this is kind of morphing a lot of things that's recommended here. A lot of what he talks about is paying attention to when you procrastinate and why, asking yourself questions about why it happened, keeping the log, all of these things, the unschedule and such. Like, if I take all of those, because I don't think I'm going to be able to be a smart enough person to log things when they happen. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. But I would be able to see it at the end of the day. So what I want to do is I want to take the next 2 weeks and do a procrastination review at the end of every day. So I think that'll be real simple for me to do because I'm already doing things like logging things in my bullet journal, which is a real one, not a fake one like yours. So I want to do that procrastination review on a daily basis just to help me see when those things happen. Because I think that would help me then see when it's happening in the moment. Because I don't think I'm going to see it unless I do that. So that's one. The other is I want to try, you mentioned the play every day thing, right? I want to take that on, but I think mine's going to be a little bit different in that it's probably got to be off of the 8 to 4 time frame, or it's got to be, like you were saying earlier, maybe a somewhat extended lunch. So maybe if I shorten my overall workday and do a longer lunch, sometimes I can do, a lot of times I could do extended lunches here without deviating from day-to-day stuff. I would just keep my plate with me so people think and see that I'm still at lunch.
There you go.
But I would like to try.
Work the system. It's what you got to do.
Right. I got to figure something out here. This is a great time for me to be doing so because we're now living in an apartment, so I don't have a lot of like house commitment type stuff that keeps me busy when I'm off of work. So doing things after hours is actually quite simple as well, and I could easily incorporate my kids into it too. So I want to try to figure that out. This is a good time to do that. So no idea what the results of that will be, but it'll be an experiment nonetheless. So that's what I'd like to do there.
All right.
Great fun. Style and rating, I suppose this is my book. So as far as style goes, we've talked about this on and off through this in that it's a little disjointed to follow things. You really have to look at the high level of what he's saying. You can't nitpick him. Like, you can't follow the word for word because that doesn't matter in this one. You cannot follow the details here because you'll get lost, like I did in a number of cases where it's like, you didn't define three-dimensional thinking. I thought you would. Like, I was trying to find it and reread a couple sections because, like, did I miss this? I appreciate you explaining it because I got a better view of it now than what I did reading the book. So that's a thing. So my point is, this book doesn't seem to have, I don't feel has the flow of a lot of other books. I feel like it's written quite quickly Maybe it didn't have the editing pass on it that it should have from an overarching level. Maybe that's why it's not a 3-part book. I don't know. But these are things that it made it kind of difficult for me to read. I don't know if you had the same, hopefully you'll tell me, but this wasn't one that I could just sit down and go. I had to kind of work at reading this one. It wasn't something I could just sit and, go into a flow state and read it. Maybe it was because I didn't meditate before I read it. So that is something that I struggled with. As far as how to rate it, there's a lot of stuff here that I just don't see how it fits. And some of that, of course, is a factor of when it was written. The age of the book is showing through on this one. So maybe this book has a lifespan. Some books are like that, where they're written for a time period, and once you've moved on beyond that time period, they'll just fall off, and they're not a thing you should read anymore because they just don't apply. Maybe this is one of those, and we're reaching the end of its lifespan. Don't know. It's very possible. But I think I'm going to put this at a 3.0. I am, because there's so much of this that I struggled with. There's so much of it that I cannot apply. Again, he's reading our mail at the beginning, and then after like chapter 2 or 3, it's like, okay, you lost me. Like, this is just, I don't know how to do anything with anything you're saying. And yet I have a couple action items. So maybe I'll change my mind, and this will be one that I'll re-rate at a 5 later on. But right now, it's kind of a pain to me. So I'm going to put it at 3.0.
All right. So let me ask you a question. So with Getting Things Done, for example, David Allen updated it because the original version was talking about different apps and things that were not relevant anymore. How would you feel about this book being updated? Would you want to read one that is updated and expanded for the information age or not?
I think I would. I would love to see how it translates from someone who wrote this and is into this system. I would love to know how he would translate it into today's modern workforce.
Sure. I agree that translation needs to be done. I would rather do it myself than have him do it for me.
Sure. Yeah.
So it is older. It's almost as old as I am. And as I read that, in 1989, when it was written, I was 7 years old, and I try to picture back when I was 7, the world that I lived in and my parents worked in. How would they have interpreted this book at that point? And I feel like it's probably pretty good. The unscheduled specifically, like we talked a lot of specific things in there that I didn't necessarily agree with. I wouldn't do it that way. But I feel like the general idea of the unschedule is really good. We have trouble translating the specifics of it now, but I think the core concept is good. And I don't know how I would have reacted to that idea in 1989. Also, I feel like that putting the play stuff in first and then letting work happen around it, it's another way of saying the Big Rocks by Stephen Covey. Time blocking, hyper-scheduling, however you want to define it. These are all iterations of this idea. Would we be talking about time blocking if Dr. Fiore had not talked about the unschedule in 1989? I don't know. I feel like these things build on each other. So I'm trying to view this as like its historical role in relation to all the other books that we have read. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's not what I expected. And I'm actually thankful for that. It's a book about procrastination, and there wasn't a single mention of the Pomodoro method.
Right.
So if you're coming at it from a recent historian's perspective of the productivity space, that really tells you all you need to know about this, because immediately we associate procrastination with Pomodoro method.
Yep.
It's not that at all. You do have to kind of translate it for someone who has a history reading the types of books that we read. I feel like there is some good stuff in here, as evidenced by the action items that we have. I did not expect to read a 30 plus year old productivity book and walk away with the action items that I did. So I feel like that is evidence of a pretty solid message. In terms of the style, I didn't really care for the style. He tells a lot of stories about people that he's worked with. For the right person, those stories are very effective. I wanted to skip most of them, to be honest, though.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting a little bit more cynical about stories when I read them in books, period. I think that is a possibility. Because I understand the role immediately when I start one of those stories, unless it's framed like Adam Grant did in Think Again, or Ryan Holiday is another person who I like their stories. But the stereotypical, I'm going to tell you a story now in the middle of a productivity book, I know exactly what's coming, and I feel like I can skip that and not miss anything for the most part. So I am struggling a little bit with where to rate this. I think it's a little bit better than the 3.0 that you picked. I'm trying to decide if it's a 4.0 or not. I don't know. I guess there isn't a whole lot new here for me based on the stuff that we've already read, and it's not the type of book that I would recommend on a like top 5, top 10 sort of list. It is dated. You do have to translate stuff. So there's a lot going against it. I did enjoy it. I'm going to rate it, I think, at 3.5. And David Sparks is going to yell at me because he hates those 0.5 ratings. Which, to defend that for a second, these 5-star ratings, this is totally based off of the star ratings on Amazon. So you look at a book on Amazon and you have like 4.5 stars. You know, just the little icons, not like the numbers, but you look at it and you're like, oh, that's not quite 4, not a little bit more than 3. Like, that's the whole purpose. So I understand why people maybe don't like those, but I'm going to say 3.5.
They want you to do 3.175.
Not going to happen. Nope. 3.5.
All right. Well, we can put this one on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Next is Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. This is one of those books that I have referenced over the years because I have listened to the Audible version before I realized that I should be reading physical books all the time. So this will be the first time that I've actually read this book, but the second time that I have gone through it, and it really impacted me when I listened to it the first time. So I think there's a lot to talk about in this one. Hopefully it's as good as I remember.
I'm going to have to buy it again. I found out because I have this book somewhere, but we moved and it's in a box somewhere. I have no clue where it's at. I went digging through book boxes in our storage unit. It's like, I've got no clue. So I'm going to buy it again. So,
all right.
Anyway, I'll buy Leaders Eat Last again. But then after that, we're going to go through Digital Body Language. This is by Erica Dewan. This was written and just released here about a week and a half ago. The tagline on it is how to build trust and connection no matter the distance. And given how much we've had to do with remote relationships over the last year and a half, I feel like this could be good for us to talk about. Just like, how do you manage relationships from a distance? Like, I feel like that could be a good conversation.
Absolutely.
So there you go. Digital Body Language. We'll see what comes of that. I don't have an additional Gap book this time around. I have not picked up the second book of Hitchhikers this time around. But do you have a Gap book, Mike?
I do, and it's not a fiction book. Sorry. But I have to read. Well, we've been starting to do some strategy stuff for Blanc Media, and we've got a team retreat coming up. And so a while back, we all attended a workshop by Donald Miller, and he has a book that goes along with that, which we are going to be talking about when I have to go to Kansas City, not too far in the future. So I'm going to be going through Business Made Simple by Donald Miller. And I've gone through some of Donald Miller's other stuff, and it's good. I think I've shared on this podcast about how I saw him actually at EntreLeadership a while back. And he's sharing the stage with like Seth Godin and Alan Mullally and Dan Cathy. And he's definitely, that the Sesame Street thing, one of these things is not like the other.
Yep. Yep.
He's definitely a different style than a lot of those people. But I do think his message is actually pretty good. Story brand was really good, I thought. So we'll see if this one is good.
Sure. It sounds interesting. Well, I hope that's a good one for you. That all said, thanks to everybody who's stuck with us through our fun tech adventure today. I am going to be doing some work next week on this because this has to be better. I'm not going to deal with what we've got here today. So thanks to you who have joined us live today on the YouTube channel. Super grateful to have folks. We don't always get a chance to respond to everybody there, but we do keep up with what's going on in the chat and reference it occasionally. But thank you to you who have joined us. Also, if you haven't already, check us out on our Bookworm Club. If you want to check that out, go to bookworm.fm/membership, and it's a simple $5 a month. And for that, you get access to a private area in the forums at club.bookworm.fm. You get some special wallpaper, some old Gap book episodes, all of Mike's MindNode files. There's a lot going on in that whole system. So check that out if you haven't already, and we're super appreciative to those of you who do that because you do help us keep the lights on. So huge thanks to those of you who are Bookworm Club members.
All right, so if you're reading along with us, which you should be, pick up Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.